Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to another episode of Jump Jet. My name's Jake, and we're going through the typical questions that you get during a front-end developer or web developer interview. We're running through like 100 questions. I'll try to get through them a little bit quicker. Uh, Today's question is still related to HTML, and the question that you're likely to get is something along the lines of, explain to me what progressive rendering is. So to answer that question, first we'll just take a little bit of a detour. Um, when we talk about rendering, we're talking about what the browser does when it downloads a web page. Now, it goes through a variety of steps, and they're sequential steps. So what you have is you've got the DOM, which takes the HTML page and translates that into an object representation. So that's called the Document Object Model, and you can see that here, a representation of the DOM. So that is the document, then you have like the HTML tags, like, the head and title and body, paragraphs, divs, all of that jazz. That is transferred into this object model. Then the browser does the same for any styles, the CSS Object Model. So it does something very similar, and it goes through the CSS rules and sees how they're applied and to which elements, and it creates another object model. Once it's done that, it combines them into what we call the render tree. The render tree is what is visible on the page. So it doesn't include the title, for example, because that's not visible on the page. If something is like display none or hidden, it doesn't include that, but anything that's visible, it turns it into another object, what they call the render tree. And so you see here on the page, it's going through the HTML, the head, the body, and also the styles that are applied to each of them, and it turns all of them into this little representation. Now, when the browser is doing all of this, we call it rendering. And if you wait for an entire page to load, it can take anywhere from between, half a second if it's a tiny page with a tiny little bit of HTML, through to, I'm sure you've had the occasion where it's taken like a minute to download a page if you're on a mobile browser or your internet is slow. So that's a poor user experience. When we talk about progressive rendering, it's about identifying, out of all these things that have to be rendered to the page, what is the most necessary or critical parts of that page. So this is an analysis, it's part of a Google PageSpeed Insights page. And this is actually a time analysis of what the browser is doing, going through requesting the page, getting the HTML, building that DOM that we talked about, the Document Object Model, trying to render the HTML, building the CSS Object Model, grabbing scripts and downloading them and then executing them. What we can do when we talk about progressive rendering is actually break it down and say, okay, what's the most useful content, or what are the most useful things for the user to see as soon as possible? And you might end up deciding that that's above the page content. So if you have something like, let's just go to Facebook, you would jump in there, you see that straight away these little parts on the side loaded quickly, and then a couple of other things loaded, and then a little bit later we had more content come into play. So what Facebook is doing is they've decided what the most important content is to show to the user first of all, and then it's rendered that as quickly as possible, and then it's gone back and gotten extra resources and showed them on the page. You see with the new LinkedIn website, they do something quite similar. So you see here it loads, and I don't know if you guys caught that, but in the very first like half second, all of the content is kind of grayed out. So we're just seeing something on the screen, but we're not seeing the actual web page. This is progressive rendering in action. What they're doing is they are rendering, say for example, some of the content, but with no words, no pictures or anything. They're showing me some content as soon as possible while they wait for other content to arrive. And this is what we call progressive rendering. And the reason we do this is, even though the actual usable content is not there straight away, the user gets the feeling that the page is loading, that something's happening. So when we talk about progressive rendering, it's about deciding what are the most critical parts of the page that have to be shown to the user, and how can we show it to them as soon as possible. And then it also might be, for example, something called lazy loading, where you have images further down the page that you know the user is not going to see straight away. So what you do is you defer the downloading of those images, and you might use some JavaScript to only load the images when you know the user is coming down to that section of the page. This is another example of progressive rendering. So when we go back to the object model and the CSS object model and the render tree, it's all about deciding, of everything that the browser is trying to display on the page, what is the most critical, what slows down the page the most, and of those things, can you choose to show the user something as soon as possible before deciding to show them the rest of it. By doing this, you can speed up the feeling of your pages. I also found something pretty cool that I'll show you here. It's a YouTube video. This is from, it's quite old actually, but it's a very, very slowed down representation of a browser rendering content. And it shows you that it's very much like a step-by-step process. So you'll see here, and this is slowed down like around about 1,000 times. But the browser is getting the HTML document object model, and it's getting the CSS, which is defining the rules of where it should be positioned. And it's bit by bit, block by block, arranging these sections and rendering these for the user. And you'll see that, okay, the video, so we don't always need to see the entire page straight away. So when you talk about progressive rendering, it's about deciding what is the most critical information to show the user as soon as possible. There are a lot of different techniques regarding this. It's even related to, for example, the script tags, the async and defer tags, or attributes that we talked about. Or it's related to sometimes inlining CSS instead of loading it in an external style sheet. So there's a lot to learn about the way that the browser renders a page, and it's something that you should do. I definitely suggest visiting developers.google. They go through website performance. There's some really, really great resources here that you can learn about how the browser renders a page, and what's the most critical thing to render, and why things are slow sometimes. And if you Google kind of website performance optimization, things like that, you'll find quite a lot of resources related to this. Not only to just reducing the size of the page, but also using progressive rendering to speed up the performance of your page and what the user sees. So yeah, overall, if you give an answer along those lines, the interviewer is going to know that you've done your research to an extent, and you kind of know what you're talking about, and you also know about why performance is important on the web, and that makes you a very good developer and makes you employable. So yeah, I'll upload some more videos. I swear to God, I'll upload some more videos soon, and hopefully that helps someone out there. Yeah, so good luck with your interviews.